Well, ever since former contractor Edward Snowden leaked 1.7 million classified documents to the world detailing the NSA's internal structure, President Obama has been walking the fine line of political fallout. During a speech at the Department of Justice last week, the president finally addressed the issue and announced sweeping reforms to the way the National Security Agency collects digital information. The changes included more oversight by the executive branch, reworking national security letters that force private companies to hand over customer information to the NSA, and an end to Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which allows for bulk collection of metadata. Now, some say that the president's reforms went too far. Others say that they didn't go far enough. Was this historic speech enough to quell the privacy concerns expressed by civil liberties advocates and lawmakers like Ron Wyden and Rush Holt? Well, Matthew Kelligrew is a legal fellow at the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, and he joins me now. Matthew, thank you so much for joining me. Tech companies and industry groups like the Computer and Communications Industry Association, which represents Google, Microsoft, and Facebook, say that this reform speech was a step in the right direction, but it didn't go far enough. Do you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I do. There was a lot left out of the speech the president made, although he did acknowledge a couple of really important points that I think many civil liberties activists like myself really care about, specifically connecting the legacy of systemic, oppressive abuse of surveillance programs to current data collection institutions. That was a good thing to at least to acknowledge.
So what major reform would you have liked to have seen announced in this NSA speech?
Well, I mean, in a dream world, what I'd really like to see is the Patriot Act reevaluated. You know, all of the reforms that the president offered in the speech sort of still occurred under the rubric of the Patriot Act, which, in my opinion, and I think in the opinion of many, adequately prioritized public safety, weighted against constitutional concerns.
Meanwhile, he did take a closer look at one section of the Patriot Act, and that's Section 215, the bulk collection of metadata. Now, he did say that he wanted to reform it in the way that you and I know it, meaning that the government will no longer be responsible for collecting and storing that information. As I understand it, he wants to put that into the hands of third parties. What do you think about that?
I think it's a good start. Section 215 and metadata collection are kind of really only the tip of the iceberg of the total amount of information that the NSA collects and processes. And it's not simply the NSA that's engaged in data collection. I mean, it's also the DEA, and it's the FBI, and to a certain extent it's the CIA, although their domestic concerns are a little limited. The thing that I would have liked to see more of, and that I think went unaddressed when we focus on metadata collection, is internet surveillance and is in-person surveillance, and it's sort of the convergence between multiple technologies together. When we focus only on metadata collection, the call records, you know, then we sort of lose the bigger net that is also being cast simultaneously.
Now, throughout the speech, President Obama was trying to balance between defending the NSA and reforming it. Now, I want to play a part of where he's talking about the steps that he had taken in the past to keep the surveillance apparatuses in check, and then I'll get your opinions.
Okay.
We increased oversight and auditing, including new structures aimed at compliance. Improved rules were proposed by the government and approved by the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. And we sought to keep Congress continually updated on these activities. What I did not do is stop these programs wholesale. Not only because I felt that they made us more secure, but also because nothing in that initial review and nothing that I've learned since indicated that our intelligence community has sought to violate the law or is cavalier about the civil liberties of their fellow citizens.
So he says nothing violated the law or the civil liberties of Americans. If that's the case, then why call for this massive reform? Why not stick by the NSA's policies?
Well, I mean, calling for the massive reform comes unambiguously from the disclosures made by Edward Snowden. And when the president says that the NSA hasn't stepped over the line or violated civil liberties, that's simply not true. In fact, there's quite a bit of journalism around the NSA's use of their data collection systems to monitor their ex-girlfriends, and it's like the history of abuse weighted against the potential for abuse is, I think, the bigger question. the potential for these systems to be abused, even with the safeguards that the president is suggesting, is still extremely high. And that's what really concerns us, I think. The lack of transparency and the incredible amount of secrecy with which these organizations operate permit the types of overreaches that can go totally unnoticed until a person like an Edward Snowden comes forward. So I don't think that those reforms, although they acknowledge the appropriate direction, don't do enough to say the structure of the FISA court, the FIS court, Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which itself operates in secret, and the ability of Congress to actually effectuate meaningful regulations on NSA activity. None of that is really addressed in any real depth.
Now, we've talked about reforms being made on a federal level. I understand there's also a number of legislations coming up on a state level. Can you walk us through a couple of those ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, I think, I heard you mention the Holt bill, the Surveillance State Repeal Act by Rush Holt. That's one approach at the national level. I think many activists and people who are just concerned with their civil liberties generally think about where they live. And, you know, the state, individual states and individual communities are the right place to really be active in an individual sense. So to that end, there's the Fourth Amendment Protection Act, which came up in California, and there's another version of that in Washington State. There's about 6 other states, Indiana, Tennessee, and there's more on the way all the time. These state-level legislation prohibit the state from participating in or assisting in bulk data collection, not limited only to the NSA, but to any federal agency that would undertake it. And so that's applying state constitutional privacy standards to the state's participation with federal programs.
But at the same time, given those national security letters, is there any way to know whether or not those companies are actually participating given the nature of those classified national security letters?
So here's the brilliance of it, is that it doesn't deal with private conduct. Like, I think the civil liberties concerns around Google data collection are one thing, and that's a conversation worth having, but the fact of the matter is Google's never gonna kick in your front door. You know, that's the job of the FBI. And so what this legislation does is it prevents the state from providing material resources to organizations, federal organizations that are engaging in bulk data collection. That means water, that means power, that means access to roads and access to internet bandwidth. So without the state's cooperation, these federal programs couldn't operate. So when the state withdraws its cooperation on privacy grounds and on constitutional grounds, it really cripples the programs from going forward and puts the onus on the federal government to come up with better, more comprehensive, more secure programs that are really going to fit what people in regular communities and regular towns are willing to accept.
Very interesting. Thank you so much for walking us through some of those state legislations, as well as how some of the privacy advocates are responding to the NSA reforms. Matthew Kelligrew, a legal fellow at the Bill of Rights Defense Committee.
Thank you.